And if
I'm
you
gonna
want,
talk.
good morning, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live today. We have a very special guest today, Laura Schmidt. Laura, welcome.
Hi, Laura.
So it's the show of Laura's this morning. Laura, it's so nice to have you, and this is such an important conversation to be having. So I want to open with a quote that actually comes from you. At no time has our species been more bombarded with stuff that is designed to get us hooked. And food, specifically ultra processed food, being one of them. And that's exactly what you're going to be breaking down for us today. So, welcome to Hooked on Food with Dr. Laura Schmidt. Laura brings a multidisciplinary approach to solve for truly what is an intractable issue. But hopefully, we're going to feel a sense of hope after our conversation today. She's both she's has a background both in public health and sociology, and so she's a professor at the UCSF School of Medicine. She heads up the UCSF Food Policy Lab. She works directly with policymakers to design policies that reduce the consumption of ultra processed foods. She is frequently in the media, which is actually how I heard her on an NPR affiliate station. She was amazing. I encourage you to check out her TED Med talk, as well as a couple of other recent talks that April will be posting. So, as usual, please share where you're coming from. I'm actually coming from right across the bridge from you, Laura. I'm actually staring at the Golden Gate Bridge right now. I'm on the Marin side. Usually I'm on your side. Um, but both of us today are coming from the San Francisco Bay Area. So please share where you're coming from. It looks like so far we've got Denver, Arizona, Minneapolis. So good to see all of you. And as usual, please share your questions and comments as we go through. So I want to start first, Laura, with your story. Can you share a little bit about what inspired you to do this work?
Yeah, so I got my start at one of the premier alcohol research institutes funded by the NIH back in the 1980s and 90s. And I was studying alcohol problems, and I was particularly interested in the questions around why people in lower income brackets are more likely to experience alcohol problems. And that got me into looking at communities that are, low income, urban ghetto type situations where there's an abundance of corner stores that have often predatory contracts with the alcohol industry to push heavy, high ethanol products on the population. And I was particularly working in the San Francisco Tenderloin community and realized that actually there are a lot of kids that live there. And the community has so many liquor outlets with drug dealers in front of the stores that the kids have to have a special program called Safe Passage to get to school, to walk from their homes to the school bus. And I realized that if you grow up in a community like this, where you are literally bombarded 24/7 with alcohol outlets and drug dealers in front of them, yeah, there's a stronger likelihood that you are going to develop an alcohol problem. It makes a ton of sense. And since then, there's been a lot of research measuring alcohol environments and proving that this is actually the case. One of the things I noticed about the kids in the Tenderloin was that at least the city was regulating the density of alcohol outlets in their community, but there was no fresh food available. And these kids were experiencing high rates of type 2 diabetes. And, that's a disease. My grandmother had it. She acquired it when she was in her late 50s. And, back in my day, that type 2 diabetes was a disease of adulthood.
Yeah.
And I was shocked to learn that it was a disease that it was occurring in children. And since then, rates have increased tremendously. We now realize that fatty liver disease, a precursor, is also highly prevalent in children. We're starting to see young people develop colon cancer. And so I got very concerned about the lack of regulatory controls around ultra processed foods as a vector for causing these cardiometabolic diseases. And thinking a lot of my skills in understanding how environments drive alcohol problems could be applied to the food situation. And so about 20 years ago, I pivoted pretty dramatically and started working on sugar and ultra processed foods.
I also worked in the San Francisco, actually, public school system. And one of the things related that I saw related to our conversation today is my last school that I worked at was a charter school, and the charter school would actually specifically look for sites that had fast food restaurants as the place where students could get their lunch. So we truly become the environment that we are in, and we understand that with our kids, but for some reason we have a harder time understanding that with adults, which brings us to this myth about individual responsibility. And this is something that people on our conversation today, we hear this all the time. Just take personal responsibility when it comes to our health and wellness, when it comes particularly to healthy eating. Tell us a little bit more about why that's not working, and yet why it persists, and also why it's not working.
So this is a myth that's been promulgated by the food industry. There was a few years ago, there was a really interesting episode where a bunch of scientists funded by Coca-Cola were outed by an investigative journalist at the New York Times, Anahad O'Connor, demonstrating that they were being paid to do research that argued that you could eat ultra processed foods and still still be healthy. And if you weren't, it was because you weren't exercising enough. And so this is a very intentional and quite deliberate strategy used by the industry to shift the blame away from their own products. And you can imagine, if you know that you're making products that are designed to be overeaten and make people and causing illness, it's in your best business interests to do everything you can to shift that narrative away from self-accountability and towards user accountability. It's a very common strategy. It's been used by the tobacco and the alcohol industries for a very long time. And because Americans, we come with a set of norms around individual responsibility anyway, it really gets traction in our culture in a way that it doesn't in other cultures. They're a little more communalistic. And so this is a tremendously damaging myth. It's great for the industry because it keeps them from having to be accountable for the products they that cause harm. But for individuals, it really plays into a true mythology, and I think has been incredibly destructive. Since the beginning of the obesity epidemic, these companies have been, on the one hand, uh, powering down on marketing indulgence foods, but on the other hand, marketing diet foods, whether it's fake fat, fake sugar. And a lot of that is targeted at women in particular. It's a very misogynistic narrative. That women somehow lack self-control and should be on a diet all the time. And of course, this has gotten our whole society on this yo-yo dieting dynamic that is really, really unhealthy from an individual weight loss standpoint. We know that from lots of trials that the metabolic set point just adjusts to a lower calorie intake and causes metabolic disruption. And so it's a very damaging myth. It also causes a lot of weight stigma, which makes it even harder for people who have some excess weight to lose it and feel comfortable exercising, going to the doctor. So it's a very destructive myth. It happens that it sits nicely in our culture. So it's a very hard thing to fight back against, but it really is a linchpin for this whole debate. Once we turn the focus off of the individual and back on the industry, then we can start figuring out ways to solve this problem, which is really situated in the food environment, not in the individual by any means.
Which really brings you to this point that you make about freedom of choice, that we have freedom of choice.
It's
Tell
a
us.
complete illusion, Laura. It's again, it's an illusion that has been very carefully crafted by the food industry. So all you have to do to understand the lack of choice that we have is walk down the cereal aisle in any grocery store. And what you're going to see is a bunch of boxes, a whole wall of boxes, floor to ceiling, that look like infinite choice. Different cartoon character on every box, different flavor, different. Turn any one of those boxes around and you'll see the same three ingredients: refined carbs, sugar, and a bunch of chemicals. And so the idea of choice is an illusion that has been created by this industry, again, to keep us stuck in low cost foods that make money for them. They're cheap, they're convenient, they're shelf stable, they're even lightweight so that they don't have to be they're not expensive to transport. So our food system is really set up effectively to serve the industry. The problem is it's not serving us.
And again, to our listeners, and it's so nice to see we've got a lot of people coming in here, including, it looks like the most number of people are coming from Colorado. Please share your
Oh,
comments,
yay.
any questions. Um,
The lowest obesity rate in America is in Colorado. I want to know
oh,
what your magic is. Yeah.
oh, wow. So let's talk about a little bit more about, why we can't stop eating unhealthy foods.
So fortunately, we've got a lot of evidence that has accumulated on what is it about this food that causes people to overeat it. And this evidence comes from a bunch of different disciplines. It starts with the head of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, who was one of the first scientists to use neuroimaging to image addiction, namely dopamine downregulation in the brainstem. And this is so we know we actually have diagnostic tools to image people craving food, eating food of different types, and to understand how that triggers dopamine reward systems in the brain. It turns out that the footprint in the brain looks a lot like the footprint for tobacco. The dopamine that's triggered is about at the same level as you would see for nicotine. And it is not a surprise that the tobacco industry was really instrumental during the 20th century at launching ultra processed foods. They owned the biggest food companies in America in the 1980s and 1990s, which is right when ultra processed foods were scaled up in our food supply. So we know from neuroimaging research that there's evidence that there's an addictive response that looks a lot like cigarettes. In addition, we have very well-controlled randomized clinical trials. Kevin Hall at NIH, no longer at NIH, was the pioneer in this type of research, where you literally lock people up in a hospital and you feed them either an ultra processed diet or a somewhat identical in terms of macronutrients and other factors, a minimally processed diet. And in that experimental paradigm, people eat about 500 calories per day more when they're on the ultra processed diet. We currently have a lot of research going on. I'm involved in this myself, trying to understand what is it exactly about the UPF that is causing people to overeat it. But what we currently know is that people are overeating it by a large amount. So 500 calories a day is kind of almost as many calories as you'd be getting if you were eating an extra a Big Mac before bed, right? So it's almost a whole meal of calories. So it shouldn't be any surprise to anyone that when you have most of the food in the American food supply, it's about 70% of what's in the grocery store is ultra processed, and you're just eating normally in this food environment, you're going to overeat and you're going to gain weight. And not by a small amount of calories, by a lot. And then the final body of research that kind of seals the deal here is the kind of work I do, which is using internal industry documents on the food industry to study the R&D and the different strategies that these companies use to create ultra-processed foods,
And
how
that
they
they're
engineer them.
intentionally doing this.
Yes, quite intentionally,
Mhm.
using a lot of cigarette technology in the tobacco-owned food companies, and ironically, using the very technologies like fMRI that Nora Volkow at the National Institute of Drug Abuse is using to diagnose and try to cure addiction, using those technologies to better design the food to be addictive. And so you put all of that together, and it's pretty clear that the food is being designed and it is successfully doing what it's intended to do. It's causing people to buy more, overeat more, and therefore to gain weight. And with that weight gain comes a higher risk, not inevitable, but a higher risk for cardiometabolic diseases.
And in your TED Med talk, you described how they will put people in an MRI and then feed them Doritos to
Yep.
see exactly. I mean, that is just horrifying.
I've come, I study the food industry, and I've come to really respect the ingenuity and the enterprising spirit and the strategic know-how of the CEOs of these companies, particularly, the CEO of Philip Morris, when he owned Kraft General Foods. It was the largest consumer product good company in the world. It was the largest tobacco, largest food company in North America. Kraft was. And I mean, these guys are really good at what they do. And I think if it weren't causing tremendous population level harm, it'd be great. It's capitalism at play. But the problem is they're incentivized to create products that sell. They are not incentivized to in any way to create health. And even when they're creating products that say they're healthy, ultimately the business model is such that when you have to use a lot of chemical additives and fake ingredients and highly refined ingredients, you're probably still producing an unhealthy product. It might be low fat or low sugar, and from the standpoint of nutrients be a little better than a high sugar, high fat product. It's still designed in such a way that it's going to trigger that reward drive, and it's going to cause potentially metabolic perturbations that we really need to think about.
Okay. So now what? Like,
What do
how do
we
we
do?
how do we fight back? And a lot of the people who are with us today, and again, please submit your questions, are working in a workplace environment, are workplace well-being professionals. So, and I know that you just finished up a clinical trial, an intervention in a work setting. So let's start in the workplace, and then we can kind of expand upon that. What's one way that leaders in a workplace can fight back against this?
So, a lot of what I do is to take models that we know work for alcohol and tobacco, since alcohol and tobacco are so similar to ultra processed foods, and in many cases made by the same companies historically. It really makes sense to take what we know from tobacco and alcohol policy and apply it to ultra processed food. And it turns out that we have had one of the greatest public health success stories in history around tobacco control. Back in the early 80s, when cigarette consumption peaked, almost half of us, 40 some odd percent of us, were smoking regularly, and now we're under 10%. And a lot of that was driven by a combination of different policies that we know are effective for ultra processed food. And the only problem is just how do we adapt them and apply them to the ultra processed food problem. And so things like taxation, curtailing child focused marketing, putting a warning label on it, these all work. So one of the interesting things that also works is the idea equivalent to an indoor air healthy workplace smoking cessation strategy, which is basically if people smoke, you encourage them to use nicotine replacement and get off the stuff. But if they do need to smoke, you put them into a safe place where they aren't going to expose other people to secondhand smoke. And so we took something very similar. My colleagues Alyssa Epple and Jamie Schmidt at Sutter Health, we have developed and cultivated a whole platform. We call it the Metabolic Health Improvement Partnership. And the idea is to take models from alcohol and tobacco and apply them in the workplace. And so it's a combination of taking one or multiple unhealthy ultra processed foods just out of the work environment. So in our case, we have with funding from the NIH, we've taken 15 different sites in the Sutter Health System, a big integrated health system in California, and we've randomized them. And some of these hospital sites, we just take the sugar sweetened beverages out. They are the paradigmatic ultra processed food, tons of sugar, very bad for health, no reason for anybody to drink this stuff. And so we take those out, and then in addition to that, we make available a brief counseling intervention that's very similar to what workplace wellness folks use for alcohol and tobacco, which is about a 10-minute counseling intervention where we assess how much sugar are you consuming, how much would you like to quit, would you like to reduce your workplace. We're taking soda out of your face. It's not going to be in your vending machines or your cafeterias. Now would be a great opportunity to cut down or quit. So we have we've done, this is our third clinical trial on this intervention. This is the most expansive. It's 15 sites. We measure our primary outcomes, our health biomarkers, blood biomarkers like fasting insulin and fasting glucose, the prediabetes type of markers, as well as lipids for looking at heart disease risk. And what we find is that employees, we recruit people who are heavy SSB consumers, and we find that they reduce their consumption by a very large extent. And we can move the dial. They lose within 10 months. They lose half an inch in their waist circumference, which is really good because we know that belly fat is metabolically active and a really a health concern. And people do especially well when they get the combination of the environmental change with a little bit of counseling to encourage them and give them strategies for how to quit.
And I'm curious, first of all, that's amazing. And kudos to you for doing that. I mean, I'm really hanging on to every word that you're sharing. I'm curious, how many people are participants, or how many people are
So
you
we
actually?
have 604 people in the large 15 site trial, but I will say that my own university, UCSF, we were the guinea pigs, and we took soda out of everywhere in our entire campus footprint. We've got 25,000 employees, second largest private employer in San Francisco.
Wow.
And we took it out from everywhere in 2015. That's how we know it works. And you know what's really wonderful about these interventions, and I know you have a lot of people in this call who are skilled at wellness and employee wellness. You know, the challenge with our current strategies, even DPP, which diabetes prevention program, which are really great interventions. The challenge is that there's a lot of cherry picking in who actually benefits from these programs. You need a lot of time, you need a lot of energy and wherewithal to sit through a DPP class and lose weight and exercise and all of that. And so what we find is that we build into the workplace a disparity where the lower income paid employees don't get any benefit, and the higher income employees are the ones that use the wellness programs. Now, these food environment interventions kind of flip that whole thing on its head, where the lower income employees, like at UCSF, it would be our janitors, our shuttle drivers, those folks actually consume more SSBs. In our case at UCSF, it was before our sales ban about a liter a day. on average, whereas our doctors and managers only consume maybe half 4 ounces a day, right? And so, but it turns out that when we take the SSBs out of the workplace, it benefits the lower income employees more because they're consuming more. The higher income employees that don't consume it really don't care because they don't buy it. And so it's a very useful strategy. I think food environment strategies in the workplace are going to become the primary way we combat diabetes and obesity in the 21st century. Very much taking a page from the tobacco model, where we really focus on making the workplace environment where people are spending most of their time, making it a healthier environment, and worrying a little less about one-on-one interventions with a very small segment of the affected population.
I'm so happy to hear this. Okay, we've got a question here. I love this conversation. What are intervention ideas for employers with large work at home population? Great question.
Oh, that's a great suggestion. Well, I would suggest a brief intervention, and potentially, because this can be done on Zoom, it can be a 10-minute counseling intervention. It can be done by an employee assistance provider or a clinician or a health coach. And it would start with, how can you clean up your home environment? Just in the same way, and again, this is taking a page out of the alcohol and tobacco literature. When people go into recovery, they don't keep cigarettes in the house. They don't have alcohol in the house, right? They don't even walk down the alcohol aisle or go into bars and right. And so starting with making the default in your own home healthy food. And if you're going to have ultra processed food, do it when you're out, swing by McDonald's if you want to, and make it a special kind of thing, not a staple. And then trying a brief intervention in the home, where for people who are screened as heavy drinkers, in our case, in our Sutter Health trial, they're averaging about a liter a day at the baseline before they cut back. And so just being aware that there's a segment of the employee population that are probably pretty heavy users, probably experiencing craving and some symptoms of addiction, and are really going to need some counseling and addiction-oriented strategies to help them lower their consumption or even quit.
Because let's not forget, just like with alcohol or tobacco, these ultra processed foods are in fact designed to be addictive.
They're designed that way.
So we have a comment here from Maria. I tell clients to offer healthy food delivery options, fruit and veggie boxes. So again, helping the individuals to optimize their environment. So
when we first launched our healthy beverage initiative here at UCSF, we took soda out. A reporter from Forbes magazine called. He was very interested in what we were up to. And he said, what I hate is in the break room where people literally, like on the day after Halloween, you don't want your kids eating this crap. So you put it in the break room.
I'll give it to my colleagues.
It's really like the equivalent of indoor air pollution. Right? Yeah. We're just sort of, and so making that default something healthy is an extra step, but it really changes the culture of the workplace in a good way.
So as always, top 3 takeaways for our listeners.
Craving and food addiction are real. I think more and more people are learning this when they or loved ones experience the changes that happen when they take a GLP-1. Those drugs also work for alcohol and other substances of abuse, and there's a reason, because these products are designed to trigger the reward system in the brain. And so regardless of what you hear about individual responsibility, know that it's the food, it's not the individual. Second, because this is the reality, changing the environment is the best way to go. We talk a lot about making the healthy choice the default choice. But really what that starts with is cleaning out of the food environment anything that is going to trigger people with craving. In our clinical trials, we measure this, we measure craving. It doesn't happen in everyone. We think about 10-12% of the population has full-blown food addiction. But there are a lot of subclinical experiences with heavy craving and so forth. So this is real. And the way to address that is to remove triggers in the environment and bolster the individual's ability to navigate the food environment in a way that doesn't cause disease. And ultimately, this means that what we really need are policy changes that target the environment rather than individual level clinical interventions that target the individual. And really, we have, fortunately, really good models for how to do that from alcohol and tobacco control.
So craving and addictions are real. It's the food, not the individual. Change the environment, not the individual. And we need policy changes. And we've got
In order to do that.
we've got some positive playbooks to follow. Laura, you have been so amazing. And I know that people would love to follow your work. Can you very briefly, in our 30 seconds left, share how people can follow your amazing work?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and just Laura Schmidt, PhD. And you can also look me up at the UCSF Food Policy Lab.
Laura, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. For everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for being with us today. Stay tuned for our next event. And as always, keep changing the world. Laura, you were amazing. Thank you so much. See you all next time.